Okay, guys, it is 12:01 and welcome to Broker Q&A. I'm Tom Fulkerson. I'm your qualifying broker for the Georgia division of the Inspire Network. I'm happy that you all joined me today. I don't think we'll have a whole lot of people on the call because of Mega Camp, but we are hosting this call and the Contracts 101 Part 3 following this call at 1 o'clock. And so today, what I wanted to talk about, and of course, I'm happy to discuss anything that you all would like to bring up during this call. But today, I wanted to go over another reminder about earnest money. It seems we can't talk about this topic enough. And I still have a lot of questions, even from the most experienced agents, about handling of earnest money. So the first thing I want to say is you really need to choose wisely when you are involved in a transaction as to who is holding your client's earnest money. Preferably it's your broker. I know a lot of agents choose the closing attorney, but guess what, guys? Closing attorneys really don't want to hold earnest money. It's not their job. And I've had some really bad experiences with certain closing attorneys, not in the in-town market per se, but sometimes in the outlying markets, they don't handle it properly according to the contract. I'll just leave it at that. So be very careful about who the holder is, even if it's your buyer or if it's your seller. Okay. Remember, it's liquidated damages for your seller, so it's important to collect enough earnest money to make it hurt if a buyer defaults. So the processes and what the contract says is when you are filling out your GAR forms, you are choosing when the earnest money is to be delivered, and it should always be delivered as soon as possible. I see a lot of contracts where it's 3 days, 4 days after binding agreement date, and that's really not a good policy, because if the buyer defaults on day 1 or day 2 and we don't have any earnest money, there's no liquidated damages for the seller. Okay. So whoever the holder is has 5 banking days to deposit those funds. And if the funds are not delivered within the time frame described in the purchase and sale agreement, then the holder of the earnest money should send out a notice to the parties that the earnest money has not been collected and that the buyer is in default. Now, here's where most people have a challenge and can't remember how this is handled. So first of all, if the buyer doesn't turn in the earnest money per the contract, they need to be put on notice by the holder. And that needs to go to the seller and to the buyer. And then at that point, the buyer has 3 banking days once they receive that notice to make good on those funds. And then if they don't make good on those funds within those 3 banking days, then on the 4th day, after the 3rd banking day, the seller can terminate the contract or they can move forward with no earnest money. But my advice is don't ever allow your seller to do that, because there's no liquidated damages. And if the buyer's already defaulted in the beginning with earnest money, it's likely not going to be a very good transaction. So do we have any questions about that? By the way, Angie and I have created a form that the MCAs have in the offices if, in fact, our brokerages are holding the earnest money. The MCA would need to send that letter out if the buyer has not delivered per the terms of the contract. And it's your responsibility as the agent to follow up on that. That's very, very important. Any questions about that? Hey, Tammy. Okay, so if there's no questions, then we will go on to the next scenario. And yes, hey.
I was just coming off of mute. I'm sorry. I couldn't say hey when you spoke. I'm
No,
sorry.
no problem at all. I'm glad to see your face. So I get a lot of phone calls that it's day 4 and the buyer was supposed to deliver the earnest money on day 3. What do we do? Okay, well, we need to put them on notice that the earnest money was due and they are now in default of the contract. So they have 3 banking days to make good on those funds. So, but here's the issue, guys. If we get those calls on a Friday afternoon and the earnest money is late, hasn't been collected, hasn't been sent in, then we have to give that buyer Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday because Saturday and Sunday are not banking days. So technically, that buyer, they may not produce those funds. They may, but they may not. And if they don't, they've tied that property up for uh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days. So if the earnest money was due on day 2 and I get a call 2 days later that it hasn't been delivered and it's Friday afternoon, they have until next Wednesday to produce the earnest money. And at that point they don't, then the seller can terminate the contract. But that seller's property has been tied up all those days. So, very important. I can't reiterate enough that if it's your buyer or even if it's your seller, your broker is the best person to hold the earnest money because I can assure you we will be on top of it and make things go as they should. Any questions about that?
Hey Tom, this is Josh.
Hey, Jeff.
Would you so that
I
that
mean, Josh. You
notification to
said
your
Jeff. I thought you
buyers?
said Jeff. It's
Oh,
Josh.
no, no, Josh. Sorry.
It's
So
okay.
that notification, is that just an email or is there a notification
No, it's not an
template?
email. It can be delivered in an email, but it's actually a form that we produced as the holder. If we are the holder, it's a form that we've produced, and that's why it's so important that that your broker hold the earnest money because a lot of attorneys, they're not going to have this form, and they're not going to be as quick to respond as a broker who is holding the earnest money that's responsible. Remember, attorneys are not held to the same standards as real estate professionals because they are not governed by the Georgia Real Estate Commission.
And if you were using like deposit link, is that one way to do it, obviously, or otherwise you're dropping
Yeah,
off
you
a
can
check?
use Deposit Link. You can use any of the Earnest, any of the apps that we have that are provided. Once they have put the money into that app, it's considered received by our brokerage.
Understood. Okay.
I
Thank you.
had an instance once where an agent, I think it was in the South Fulton office, the buyer called her bank and said it was a fraudulent charge. And she had already put it into Earnest. She was just trying to back out of the contract. And she called her bank, and the Earnest app people made good on that deposit. So those are 2 really good secure ways of getting the earnest money to the brokerage. Any other questions around that? Okay, so I think what happens in the market center is there is an earnest money form that has to be filled out and turned into the MCA either with a check or with some kind of notice that's being sent via one of the apps that we use. And then that notifies them to be on the lookout. I will tell you that when I review contracts and when the other compliance officers review contracts, we have a tag for if our brokerage is holding earnest money and we notify the MCA that the contract says we're holding earnest money to be on the lookout. So they've got lots of checks and balances there. It's just really important to know what happens if it's not delivered, and that's in the body of the contract. All right. Anything else you guys need to talk about today?
Tom, I'm sorry,
Yes.
I was a few minutes late, but with that earnest money, were you saying that if the earnest money was not received by the due date, I'm not really understanding the extra days you were saying that they had to get the
Okay.
money in.
So if you have a buyer and the contract says they are to deposit the earnest money within 1 day of binding agreement date,
Mhm,
okay, and they don't do that, then we, as the holder, if we are holding it,
mhm,
then the MCA, excuse me,
mm,
the MCA would send out the notice to the buyer saying you're in default of the contract. Our earnest money was due yesterday and it hasn't been delivered.
Okay,
And then that buyer has 3 banking days once they
okay,
receive that notice to
okay,
deliver the funds.
gotcha. Okay,
And then if they don't deliver the funds within those 3 banking days, then on day 4, the seller can just terminate the contract.
okay. So that can be
But they
done
can't
without,
terminate until all that process happens.
okay. And that can also be done without an amendment changing the time frame for the earnest money.
Yep.
Okay, all
Don't
right,
need an
got it,
amendment because
got
it's all spelled out in the contract.
great, okay, thanks.
Of course. Okay, guys, that's really all I wanted to go over today. If anybody doesn't have any other questions, I will let you go. And I hope that some of you all will join Angie at 1 o'clock on Contracts 101 Part 3. And then next week on Monday, I will be hosting Contracts 101 Part 4 in our 4-part series. And then we start all over again the following Monday on Part 1. Okay.
All right, thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Have a
Tom.
good
Take
one.
care. You too.